The summer of 1994. The arcades were alive with fierce competition. The sounds of joysticks and button mashing filled the air as gamers battled in games like Super Street Fighter 2, MK2, and Killer Instinct. But amid the fighting game frenzy of the early 90s, there was one title that stood out. That game was Primal Rage.
Stop-motion animation, a technique used in the production of major motion picture special effects. Pete Kleinnow, an accomplished industry professional, animates a specially constructed stop-motion puppet.
Okay, number 17.
Primal Rage was unlike any other fighting game of its time. Sure, you had fireballs, uppercuts, and fierce combat, but in Primal Rage, you weren't controlling human fighters. Instead, you battled as massive, ferocious creatures.
Well, let's see. I had this idea for this T-Rex battle game.
No. I really wanted to do this dinosaur fighting game.
That's right. We both had the same idea at the same time, strangely enough, and
The game's look and feel set it apart from everything else and immediately drew you in. How did we learn to play these games, though? Well, in the 90s, gaming news wasn't a click away like it is today. If you wanted the latest scoop on upcoming games, cheat codes, or in-depth strategy guides, you didn't log onto a website. You grabbed a magazine, or you had a subscription to one, and for many of us, GamePro was a household name. About a month after the game was released in October of 1994, GamePro dedicated a nice spread to Primal Rage, complete with moves list. Of course, then you had to get to the arcade and have enough quarters to practice without getting your butt whooped by somebody who was better than you. Fortunately, about a year later, the game was released on consoles, which gave all the fans a home platform to practice on. Now we could go to the arcade and whoop people's butts. Well, not really. But nonetheless, it was fun to play. And it was an absolute joy getting these magazines and seeing the latest and greatest in there. And just a side note, if the strategy guides weren't good enough, you got really cool 2-page ad spreads in these old game magazines. Some of them were magnificent, like the butt of the earthworm that saved the world. And we also got reviews of the console ports, so if you weren't sure which one to get, if you had a choice, you could go check out your GamePro and see what they rated the games at. All nostalgia aside, there never really was a perfect arcade-to-home port at this time. Even later on, when they ported the Midway Treasures to PS2 and GameCube, it still wasn't an arcade-perfect port, so to speak. Now, well, in my opinion, two of the best ports are the 3DO and Jaguar. The PlayStation and Saturn arguably look better, although they're missing frames of animation and the characters are actually a little bit oversized. Either way, one of the reasons why we didn't get a perfect port even when it was re-released on Midway Treasures was because of a security encryption on the arcade hardware that was extremely difficult to get by. And while it eventually did become playable on MAME, they still couldn't bypass certain protections, and so it was set aside for quite some time. Fans of the game talked about it for years and years, hoping that somebody would be able to figure it out. And by today's standard, there aren't a lot of people who seem to like Primal Rage. It seems like it kind of has a smaller fan base. And for those who don't like it, I just think it's because they don't know how to play it. So here it is back in 2010, close to the time that it became playable on MAME. And while you can see a lot of the bugs from the protection, it was still cool to be able to play the arcade version emulated. Over time, there were improvements, but it wasn't until more recently that there were big improvements, like ones that fixed the whole game. But we're going to talk about that more in a little bit, because right now I want to dive into one other important aspect that I think gets lost in the sands of time when it comes to Primal Rage. For anyone who doesn't know the history of Primal Rage, or who thought it was maybe just like a throwaway game, it wasn't at all. Back in its heyday, Primal Rage wasn't just a hit in the arcades. It had a full marketing push behind it. Toys, comic books, and it even had an expanded universe through a novelization. For a while, Primal Rage had a firm grip on pop culture, riding the wave of dinosaur mania that movies like Jurassic Park had ignited. And from a gaming design perspective, the developers behind Primal Rage put a lot of effort into making the game stand out. The stop-motion animation technique used for the characters was groundbreaking for a video game at that time. and even to this day, it's still a one-of-a-kind game.
Okay, so let's get primal. Primal Rage.
Ready to erupt into a primal rage. But be warned, these guys don't just kick butt, they slam it.
So with all that being said, how did it take so long for us to get an arcade perfect port or perfectly playable version of the arcade game? Well, I could try to explain it myself, but instead I thought I'd bring a special guest who knows the ins and outs of the technical side of things better than anyone. Just kind of tell people who you are and why we're talking about Primal Rage.
Gotcha. I'm Old Man Ruckus, Bill McLaughlin, the CEO of Bash Game Studio and the recently formed Bash Professional Services. We specialize in retro games and retro development, but within the realm now, we contract to other third-party studios to do their projects now. So we work on games that you see pretty much all the time. We just help push out one. We got one coming in February. Then we have our own collections coming out in March and April of next year.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
I asked you to come on the show, or to come on, I guess, to talk about Primal Rage and kind of like pick your brain. And can you just kind of tell everybody like what your involvement with Primal Rage has been like on the emulation scene or just in general?
So Primal Rage was a passion project of mine. Way before Unico. Like Primal Rage was one of my favorite games. I was always horrible at it, but Primal Rage was one of my favorite games. But it was, and I guess that's why it was one of my favorite games, because I'm really bad and I'm really good at fighting games.
I won't let you!
Except that one, literally except that one. But when I had the opportunity, you know, I reached out to a couple of people. We were going to do a deal with Unico and WB, and that deal just, you know, never panned out for whatever reason. But I did get a copy in Ed Boon's hands. So the mastermind behind the emulation as a whole for this project wasn't Ryan. This was Code Frog. So Code Frog, Dan Filner, also goes Tal Keller. He's the inventor of the Moo emulation platform, which Arcade 1-Up does. He doesn't do MAME emulation. He builds it completely from scratch. But he was cool and did the demos for the, you know, for, I was trying to market it and get this out there and try to get things going. But eventually a community formed up around it, and that community took over from there. So it's like, I don't even call it my project. You know, once the community took over, you know, Code Frog got back on Twitter. He started, you know, making himself known more to people. So I started pushing people to say, hey, Code Frog is the person who developed this, man. You should pick his brain. You know, it was more the community itself, from guys like Chaotic Strike, what's my man, by the way, Hanzo, the PND Mustard, Ketchup Twins, those guys are who. Oh, and Gruntzilla. Oh man, he's super instrumental. So we got with those guys. We got with Chris Tang, one of the original devs of it. James MK was one of the guys who told me who to talk to with making this happen with on a business side. You know, and again, it didn't pan out, but you know, Code Frog definitely did his thing with this emulation platform for Primal Rage, and he's still developing it to this day for the community.
Oh, okay. So he's still trying to improve it.
Yeah, and you know, I gave him some context, you know, and told him, you know, pointed him in the right direction, because to be quite honest, he didn't actually need me and for the whole thing. I just put, you know, a lot of things together for it because I wanted to get this out there. And once he got interested in it, and then he started understanding he had connections just like I do, you know, he took it on, and it's going out there. He's going to put it out when he's able to, you know, when he's able to speak about it more, he's going to put it out on his own time. But
wow, that's crazy that you worked with one of the original devs. So I just want to pull this up so we can take a look at it.
The MKX team, that's Henzo's crew. Those
These guys right here.
Yeah, you got Ketchup and Mustard. You got a few different people now. They had tournaments on this. They had this at Combo Breaker. You know, it was pretty big when they were working this.
This game is like insanely cool though if you know how to play it. I remember just getting my butt whooped by some of the people who were really good at it back when it was in the arcade, and it was like, I mean, if they knew how to go, you were just like, oh, all right, I'm just gonna take my quarters and leave.
So I almost want to say this is Hanzo himself doing this. Yeah, it's definitely Hanzo because it's Armageddon. Gruntzilla actually made the hack and added the training mode on here, but it was for the physical, the actual arcade hardware. And then he made a version that was compatible with this. And I think this was the last set of updates I was able to provide to Dan to say, hey, this is where we are. And then after this, I had got busy on other projects anyway, so I couldn't continue it. But once Gruntzilla got on Twitter, and I saw he had added me as a friend, I plugged him in with immediately plugged him in with Strike. I plugged him in with Hanzo. Say, hey, these were the guys who were actually giving me all the data, feeding back to you. So once they got together, I gave him the Discord link. They were straight. It's been magic from there.
So the training mode that they have, this is only on the Mu emulation version, right?
I don't think so. I think there's a version that does work on MAME now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But I remember when we first started working on this, on the training mode and everything from there, the only thing I did was I ported it to, I got the ports working through Proton for Steam Deck, and then I got Bot64 working for the At Games Legends, and plugged this in.
Okay, that's wild. I'm learning a lot right now, so forgive me if I ask any dumb questions or anything.
Nothing's a dumb question. You can't ask anything stupider than I can. Or, hey, Strike has got this in.
Right.
Hanzo, all the guys who are still, plugged in with their, I was essentially a glorified middleman. And that's now that community has not just Cold Frog, but they got Chris Tang too. Those guys and Gruntzilla, everybody's in one room who's working in this. So it's like, when they get together now, I can step away and I can just download like everybody else. Just like if you really want to know, quite honestly, and the only reason I can say this now is because it fell through. The whole process of this started is because I went to John D and said, hey man, I want Primal Rage. And John D said, well, listen, sales might be an issue. And people, because of the amount of money you have to spend on a Primal Rage for the IP itself, it'd have to be worth it. So what I suggest you do is go through Fightcade, get the community started around. And that's kind of where this all came from. I would tell, hey man, Unico was going to fund it at first until, they realized the same thing.
And there you have it. Thanks to these guys and the hard work of the Primal Rage emulation community, we can still experience the game the way that it was meant to be. The reason that this game and most games that are emulated become playable is because of the dedication of the developers and the fan base who supports them. But even on their own, most of the time, it's a passion project for these developers. I think it's really important to recognize and remember that without these guys, without these developers, we would not have the ability to play all these emulated games. I mean, think about how different things would be if emulation never existed. It's kind of a small miracle, and without it, we wouldn't have this and possibly even some of the emulator platforms that you pay for now, like Nintendo's, for example. And backwards compatibility on consoles, which is even emulator and FPGA driven, well, you guys get the picture. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, I'll see you then.